From broccoli to booze to Brie, nothing makes presidents seem more like regular people than the arbitrary and utterly personal list of foods they had banned from the White House. During his time in the White House, President Harry S. Truman put the kibosh on steaks cooked rare. And since he was the one calling the shots, if you liked a little life left in your ribeye, well, tough. If you've achieved the office of President of the United States, it's assumed that you know a thing or two. And ordering a steak well done is, for anyone who appreciates steak, an oxymoron. Some would call it a crime against cattle. Perhaps it was just poor taste. But Truman was serious enough about this that he had a one-liner ready for anyone who dared question him. He'd simply respond, "Only coyotes and predatory animals eat raw beef." Not true, but okay. Hopefully, the Truman White House offered a fish option for, all the coyotes and predatory animals invited to state dinners. Michelle Obama insisted on having healthy food while her family was living in the White House. And one of the items the First Lady was firmly against was a comfort classic, that old familiar blue box from Kraft. That's right, macaroni and cheese. But it wasn't so much a ban as an upgrade. Obama White House chef Sam Cass eased the first family out of convenience food territory by transitioning them to mac and cheese made with real milk and actual cheese, the genuine article. As an administration promoting healthy food and exercise habits for young Americans, the Obamas and Cass led by example, starting with the president's own menu. It's possible to have a traumatic experience with food. Just ask President Martin Van Buren about his nasty run-in with an oversized wheel of cheese. In a tradition that began during the presidency of Thomas Jefferson, presidents would often receive a ginormous cheese as a gift from supporters. Every time there was a new president, there was a bigger cheese, meant to one-up the last one, inspiring legends about how long it actually took to finish eating these enormous wheels. But the buck stopped with Van Buren. When outgoing President Jackson served one of these mighty cheeses to 10,000 visitors during a celebration of George Washington's birthday, the stench was so bad it put Van Buren off the idea of serving food at any White House event going forward. That meant no state dinners or other fancy occasions where White House chefs got to show off their talents. Van Buren had the staff steam clean the White House so thoroughly, it was as if cheese never existed, and made sure his nose would never again be subject to cheesy insult. President George H.W. Bush was not a fan of broccoli, and everyone knew it.
But I never liked broccoli. And now that I was President of the United States, I was never eating it again.
The ish really hit the fan in 1990 when he banned broccoli from Air Force One. Sure, he tried to make a joke about it, but his hardcore anti-broccoli stance made such waves that it became one of Bush Sr.'s defining non-political moments.
There are truckloads of broccoli at this very minute descending on Washington.
It was international news, but Bush's broccoli ban may have actually helped humanize the guy. Most of us have a food that, when we see it on our plate, makes us want to flip the table, but few of us have the power to ban it from our presence. It's one of the perks of being the leader of the free world, and good on Bush for using it. But for the record, First Lady Barbara Bush still enjoyed her broccoli in the White House. Apparently, the ban only applied to the president's end of the table, and, of course, the plane. Richard Nixon pulled some more than sketchy stuff during his term in the White House, but one of his early decisions was to eliminate soup from state dinners. Obviously, deciding what not to serve when hosting dignitaries is far less controversial than, say, Watergate, but the soup thing didn't go unnoticed in the early days of the Nixon administration. The soup lobby must have lost their minds. No bisque? No bouillabaisse? No way. There was some method behind at least that part of Nixon's madness. In 1969, shortly after his inauguration, Nixon was hosting Canadian Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau at a White House dinner when the president spilled a bowl of soup all over his vest. And Nixon, who was the opposite of a take-it-in-stride Zen master, took it out on the entire food category. He permanently axed the soup course, using the excuse that the dinners were too slow and soup takes too long to eat. Nixon wanted to keep things moving.
No soup for you!
As history has since revealed, Nixon kept plenty on the down low, so he had his personal valet pass the word to Chief of Staff H.R. Haldeman, who had the job of telling the chef to strike soup from future events. For his work in the Nixon White House, Haldeman later served 18 months in prison, but he was never charged for his role in Soupgate. President Jimmy Carter's beliefs and straightforward approach to life resulted in a ban on hard liquor and spirits at the White House, even for visitors. He was another commander-in-chief who walked his talk, and dinners during his presidency were simple and homey. But First Lady Rosalind Carter wasn't completely down with his mini-prohibition. She would have preferred moderation instead, and as a result, wine was occasionally served for the purpose of toasts. Surprisingly, despite the fact that Carter hardly drank alcohol, his support of legislation called the Home Brew Act, allowing beer makers to brew at home, opened the door for the craft beer movement that came after his administration, and is still booming today. And once the Carters left the White House, they more than made up for lost time by taking up winemaking when they returned home to Georgia. Lyndon B. Johnson didn't enact a full-blown food ban in the White House. In fact, LBJ loved to eat anywhere, anytime. He'd often take breakfast in bed, loved eating leftovers, and even negotiated crucial policies during lunchtime. But there was one very particular restriction that probably inspired a great deal of behind-the-scenes cursing by the White House prep cooks. LBJ absolutely refused to eat green beans if the strings were left on them. If the strings couldn't be removed, the beans had better not show up on his plate. Yup, everybody has their weird food things, even presidents. And he wasn't wrong about those strings either. They're not edible. So if you're dining with the president and you get one in your mouth, how do you get rid of it? Think on that for a minute, then tell us Johnson's ban was unreasonable. We'll wait. Franklin Delano Roosevelt banned decadent food in the White House during his administration, but not because he didn't enjoy it. He was president during the Great Depression, when food was scarce for Americans all over the country, many of whom were standing in bread lines and going to soup kitchens just to get enough to eat. FDR and his wife Eleanor couldn't, in good conscience, dine on haute cuisine while the American people were starving and scrounging for scraps. Simply put, they knew how to read the room, and they cared to do it.
The first thing we do is to distribute the spinach, which you're all so fond of.
To make sure the first family led by example, the Roosevelts hired Henrietta Nesbitt, a friend of Eleanor's, to revamp the White House kitchen and create frugal menus using inexpensive ingredients and food rations. This reflected the diet of the average American, and though the austerity dishes were notoriously unpleasant, the White House ban on living high on the hog showed a dignity and respect for their constituents that was far more important to the Roosevelts than dining well. Long before Jimmy Carter moved in, Rutherford B. Hayes' wife, Lucy, banned liquor in the White House. Lucy had been raised by her grandfather, who was adamantly against the consumption of alcohol, and Lucy was a hardline temperance advocate for the rest of her life. Even so, President and First Lady Hayes didn't start off their administration with the ban in place, but after a dinner for the Grand Duke Alexis of Russia, where the wine flowed and flowed and flowed, Lucy was deeply perturbed. From that point forward, the Hayes White House was completely alcohol-free. Mrs. Hayes felt she was setting a good example for American wives and mothers who were then responsible for setting an example for American children. As for Rutherford, he liked to nip every so often, but he kept it out of the people's house for the sake of his presidential image, or, more likely, marital harmony. Not all food bans in the White House happened because the occupants didn't like eating something in particular. Sometimes they were enacted to prevent waste. President Ulysses S. Grant had a problem with the tradition of rolling eggs on the White House lawn during Easter festivities. Not only was it hell on the landscaping, but all that rolling was bound to make many of the hard-boiled protein bombs inedible. But not on Grant's watch. After Grant, the annual Easter egg roll was immediately reinstated. But we have to admit, Grant was onto something. It seems like a lot of good eggs have gone to waste. And these days, the price of eggs has skyrocketed. Has no president considered investing in a stock of fake eggs to roll and maybe have the guests keep as souvenirs? As of 2025, despite eggs being an expensive commodity, that would be a hard-boiled no. Maybe turkey isn't your thing for Thanksgiving. Maybe you go for something untraditional, like ham or lasagna. But if you're like President Calvin Coolidge, you draw the line at woodland creatures, even if they're presented as, gifts from the public. Look, as far as we're concerned, you don't have to be president to draw a line at raccoon for dinner. And if said raccoon is still alive, please just stop right there. When the Coolidges received the raccoon in question from a Mississippi constituent along with the suggestion that she be served for Thanksgiving dinner, the first family were smitten with her. So rather than sending her to her fate on a plate, they named her Rebecca and made her a household pet. By Christmas time, Rebecca was styling in an embroidered collar that declared her the White House raccoon and hanging with the First Lady. Rebecca brought joy to the White House residents and the American public. She even accompanied the family on vacations. And to think she could have been an entree instead. Abraham Lincoln looms large in the pantheon of American presidents for a multitude of reasons, but one of his lesser-known achievements was offering the inaugural reprieve to an innocent turkey destined for the White House Christmas dinner table.
Based on their temperament and commitment to being productive members of society, I hereby pardon. Yes.
That's right, it was President Lincoln who was the first to pardon a doomed turkey. An act that became an annual tradition continued to this day. But how did it come about? As the story goes, in 1865, a live turkey arrived at the White House, fated to become Christmas dinner.
Look, I had a chance to shoot a bunch of you the other day and didn't.
But Lincoln's son Tad begged him to spare the life of the feathered fowl, whom he named Jack. Everyone knows you can't eat food that has a name. It's barbaric. Lincoln agreed, or at least gave in, setting a standard that would be carried forward, but at Thanksgiving instead of Christmas.
Let me assure you and this fine Tom Turkey that he will not end up on anyone's dinner table, not this guy.
These days, pardoned turkeys are retired to farms or animal havens to live out their lives in comfort. Or at least that's what they say. He went to live on a farm. Sure,